In today's video, I'm going to explore a little bit more on the technical side of the lead taxonomy and how we configure that in Salesforce. What are all the important things you need to make sure you have set up in your system so you have lead sources working seamless for you. We are going to start with talking about all objects and the different objects that use lead sources. Then next, we're going to go and make sure we have all the field dependencies in place. And finally, we have all the validation rules so you can ask for lead sources at the right time. So now, going to Salesforce, we actually gonna explore all the objects that are related to lead sources. And the main ones are leads, accounts, contacts, opportunities, and finally, campaigns. So for each of these objects, you need to make sure you have lead sources. You also need to make sure lead source details field is in place, lead source grouping is there, and all the picklist options are actually in place. For each of the custom lead source fields, make sure you have all of these fields are picklist value sets stored in your Salesforce. The reason why we like to store them as picklist set values is that every time you change a value or you have to rename a picklist option, it's gonna actually rename it across all the picklist fields that we set up in the system. You don't have to set up one object at a time. It's gonna update all at once. And it's gonna save you tons of time and you can be more productive that way. Moving forward, in the next step of making sure the lead sources are in place is make sure you have all the field dependencies in place. So for that one, it's actually a little bit more tricky because you have to set up the dependencies for each field in each object. And afterwards, if you need to replace or change the dependency, you have to change that in each of the objects that you set up the lead sources. So you need to make sure you actually create two dependencies here. So one with lead source and lead source detail. Second is lead source and lead source grouping. I'm gonna demonstrate a little bit of what I'm talking about lead source, actually lead source field dependencies. So going to the lead object, click field dependencies, and as you see here, I'm going to open lead source and lead source details. This is very important. The dependencies are important because it's only gonna, when your end user selects a lead source, it then can only choose certain options dynamically depending on what you chose at lead source. The list will be limited to whatever you set up in here. So for demand, we have email marketing, blog, gated content, podcast, and webinar. So the end user goes choose demand, and for lead source details, it can only choose these 5 options. Similarly with lead source and lead source grouping, if I click edit, you can see that only a few options are available per lead source, and it will make sure that your database is safe from mistakes and user error. Finally, to make sure you have all your lead sources in place, We like to leverage validation rules because many times it's important to ask for lead sources when they're just about to close or just to make sure the data is not missing. You can also make it mandatory because you can ask for important information at a specific time. As an example, when a rep is creating an opportunity, many times they are in a rush, so you probably want to ask less mandatory fields. And then later, when they're just about to close, you can ask for that information before they close win an opportunity. This is just an example, and they need to make sense to whatever is the process that you are following. If you set up everything into the objects, you make sure you have the dependency fields in place and your validation rules, you're ready to make sure your lead sources are working correctly and the data is always in the right place at the right time. Thank you. If you like this content, please give us a like and subscribe for more technical content here at Lean Skill.